Hello, my name is Simon Double, and welcome to Inside the Rails, a monthly podcast for horse racing enthusiasts everywhere. And as ever, I'm joined by Phil Boyle from BG Racing in the leafy suburbs of Surrey. How are you, Phil?
Hi, Simon. Yeah, all good, thanks. Obviously, it's a bit of a late recording session for us this month and not much time to turn this episode around before we launch it. So, that's the sign of a busy month that we've both had. I've certainly been all over the place, not all racing related. And I know you've been clocking up the miles as well. So I'm sure We'll talk about your racing journeys a bit later on, but we were both at Nottingham for the Racehorse Syndicates Association Race Day, and I did see on social media a bunch of chaps who looked far too old to be doing so, jumping around in one of the Oxford University quads.
Yeah, I should point out we weren't jumping around on the grass, which is actually illegal unless you're a postgrad. It was an informal reunion which I organised with friends who all went to St Edmund Hall in Oxford a few moons ago, I hasten to add. We were there with partners, about 12 of us. It's the third one we've done in recent years, and we get to stay in college, which is lovely, and also a bit surreal, having breakfast in the same dining room that we used to as undergraduates all those years ago. A very nice couple of evenings. On Friday and Saturday night, we went to a couple of really good restaurants, including an excellent French one I can recommend called Pierre Victoire. There was obviously the odd libation over the weekend as well. And a few of us even went on an open-top bus tour of Oxford on the Sunday. I learned more about Oxford, the town, in an hour than I did in 3 years when I was there. Something I'd never done before. It was a great end to what was a manic 8 days, which saw me at 5 different racecourses. Anyway, some 1,200 miles later, I'm managing to tell the tale, and I'm very much looking forward to our podcast guest, jockey Stefano Cherchi. Or is it Stefano Cherchi? We'll find out. Anyway, he's attached to Amy Murphy's yard and looking forward to having him on as our special guest.
Yes, listeners will probably realise that you are responsible for this month's guest booking. I know Stefano's ridden for you several times in the past, but while you've chatted to him quite a lot, I haven't. And I suspect that many of our listeners will be pleased to find out more about an up-and-coming jockey.
Yes, Stefano rode a winner for Solario Racing on just his second ride for us when winning on Tarantino at Redcar last year. As a 2-year-old. He's been runner-up on Sharp Distinction a couple of times, and he's also ridden Dancing in the Woods. So he's no stranger to Solario Racing. He's no longer an apprentice, so it'll be very interesting to ask him how he's finding life in the weighing room without using the apprentice claim. And we'll find out about a claim later on, I'm sure. Now, Phil, what about BG Racing horses? How are things going?
Yeah, I can't really believe how quickly the month's gone. I mentioned last month I needed to organise a naming day for the new BG Racing Jumps mare, and I still need to do that. Haven't managed to get round to it yet. But she is back in training at Neil Mulholland's. She looks well. As well as the naming day, I also need to sell a few more shares of her. We all be very aware that as syndicators, we take a level of risk when we add new horses to our syndicates because the costs are the same whether we sell the shares or not, and we've got to meet the cost of any unsold shares in the horses ourselves. So I don't want to get left with too much of her, as that can get quite expensive. So, I'd better find some time to dedicate to a bit of sales and marketing.
Maybe you'll get some interest on the back of this podcast. Who knows? Let's hope so. And what about Dynamic Kate and Sajwan?
Well, I've not timed running plans very well with those two, not matched them up with our recording optimally at all. Sajwan was due to run at Bath last week, which was the last week of July, but the ground was on the soft side there. He prefers it a bit faster than that. So we've decided to wait for another race at the same course on Friday, the 4th of August. So that'll be later in the week if you're listening to this podcast soon after its release. The reports from home have been that he's moving a lot better now and working well following his gelding operation. So hopefully he'll show us a bit more on the racecourse this time.
Well, let's hope so. And what about Dynamic Kate?
Well, yeah, listeners will have to be really quick off the blocks with her. She's due to run at Worcester on the 1st of August. So if anybody manages to listen to the podcast on the day of release, then she might be worth having a few quid each way on this evening. But most people, I suspect, will end up listening after she's already run. So we'll be able to look at how she got on. She's had another breathing operation. If that works, then I'd like to think she'll run well this week. And I'll have to sadly report back next month on how they both got on, because obviously the podcast will be out before their races. So what about you? Have Solario Racing had runners this month?
We have. I have to say, with the weather being so unsettled, I can't remember a July like it. It's been really difficult to predict. It's been a nightmare trying to plan. We've got a horse like Dancing in the Woods who's a proper fast ground horse. Then at the other end of the spectrum, we've got Sharp Distinction, who needs give underfoot. And somewhere in the middle, we've got Tarantino, who's a good ground horse. I can't remember, Phil, making so many entries and then either not declaring or declaring and pulling them out, or then declaring and the ground going against us, which he did with Dancing in the Woods at Yarmouth. About 20 miles from the track, the heavens opened and we knew our fate, and he beat just one home. Now, I know we've touched upon this in the past, but I really do wish clerks of the course would not water when there's a good chance of rain coming. I just don't know why they don't wait with 40-hour declarations. Why don't they wait to see if the rain does come? And if it doesn't, then water shortly before the race. Anyway, mini rant over.
It certainly does make our lives difficult, that's for sure. It's hard enough, as you know, trying to second guess what the weather's going to do without also having to guess about the watering at the same time. So, yeah, I do feel your pain. I think I might have some ground monitoring to be doing this week for our two runners as well, because any rain this week might change conditions for us. So, yeah, always a tricky one. But going back to Dancing in the Woods, obviously he's been a pretty consistent horse in the past, and that was a sort of a back-to-back set of disappointing runs now. Did any reason come to light for that?
Despite the good to soft ground at Yarmouth, to be fair, he was beaten a long way out, about 4 furlongs out, the jockey said. So, in fact, he's just had another minor wind operation to help his breathing. He had one a year ago, and as Amy said, they often only last about a year. You'll probably know this. So, hopefully, the latest procedure will rekindle his enthusiasm.
Yeah, let's hope so. Yeah, you're right. I mean, Dynamic Kate's operation that she's just had was sort of 2 years on from her previous one. So, yeah, they definitely don't last forever. How about Tarantino and his mate Gary the Goat that we heard about last month?
Well, they seem to have bonded very well. Tarantino had to do a stalls test, having taken 3 tickets, and Gary went with him in the box to Yarmouth.
Now, I know what that's all about, as we've been through that with one or two of our horses before, but you better explain for our listeners about taking a ticket and what that's referring to.
Okay, well, with the stalls, they go in odd numbers first and then even numbers, so 1, 3, 5, 7, 2, 4, 6, 8. But sometimes you can get permission to go in last, regardless of where you're drawn. And Tarantino does have a bit of a sort of phobia about the stalls. So you take a ticket for going in last, and once you've done that on 3 occasions, you then have to do a stalls test. So Tarantino did a stalls test at Yarmouth the day Woody ran, and I'm delighted to say he passed. They have to sit in the stalls for a minute before the gates are opened, and fortunately, all went well. What they've realised, Phil, is that he goes in the stalls fine, then they put the hood on him for a minute, and then they whip the hood off just before the gates open. So that seems to work well. Anyway, he's got an entry at Newmarket on the 4th of August, so hopefully he'll behave and he'll run well.
Let's hope so, and very well explained, might I add. Finally, Sharp Distinction, what about him?
Well, he did get his ground at York. At last, the racing manager managed to get it right. It was good to soft over 2 miles, so perfect conditions. Well, we thought perfect conditions. I'll come to that in a minute. He ran a great race under Tom Marquand to come third. He probably, in all fairness, although he gets 2 miles on the all-weather at Kempton, he probably doesn't quite get 2 miles on that sort of softish ground. So we're dropping him back to 1 mile, 6 furlongs at Yarmouth, and he'll run on the day this podcast is published on the 1st of August. So again, listeners, you'll have to be up early to listen. But the day at York was fabulous, Phil, with Amy winning the £200,000 John Smith's Cup with Pride of America, which was first run the year I was born.
Wow, I didn't realise you were 70 already.
A few years less. A few years less, thank you, Mr. B. It was the 64th running, and what a fantastic result for Amy. Winning by the narrowest of nostrils to give her her biggest day on the flat, and also for apprentice Frederick Larson, his greatest day in the sun. It was lovely for those of you that saw it on Twitter, Amy's celebrations. She really does know how to celebrate, and sharing the joy not just with her owners, but with Sharp Distinction owners too. It was fantastic.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a great afternoon, although I doubt our recent guests, Stan and Claire Kubler, enjoyed it quite as much as it was their horse that was beaten a nostril by Amy's runner in the big race. So,
yeah, Astro King, wasn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. For every up, there's a down, unfortunately. Now, of course, there's been plenty of other action on the track. Although we're recording just ahead of Glorious Goodwood, we've, of course, had the Irish Derby and Oaks. They were won by a pair of Aidan O'Brien trained and Ryan Moore ridden favourites, August Rodin and Save the Last Dance. Although neither were particularly impressive winners compared to their starting prices. The starting prices suggested that they would win a little bit easier than they did.
Well, interestingly, Auguste Rodin, who disappointed in the 2000 Guineas, disappointed big time in the King George when virtually tailed off. Clearly something amiss there. However, well done to the connections of Huckham and commiserations to those of Westover. What a duel it was. It reminded me of that Bustino Grundy duel many, many years ago. Both horses gave their all in a nail-biting finish, and the Shadwell horse Huckham just prevailed under Jim Crowley. A really great race, though. We've had some great meetings recently, haven't we, Phil? And it was business as usual for Aidan O'Brien, with Paddington winning the Eclipse. But the July Cup was won by one of the smaller guns, trainer Julie Camacho in the north, and she was enjoying every minute of her success the day Amy was enjoying things up at York with Pride of America.
Yeah, I thought it was great to see a stable like Julie Camacho's having a sort of a real top table success with Shaquille in the July Cup. It just goes to show there's hope for all of us. You don't necessarily have to have your horses trained by one of the big guns like Aidan O'Brien, John Gosden or Sir Michael Stout in order to have success at the highest level. On to the other on-course action. There's been the start of the 2023 Racing League. That kicked off at Yarmouth last week. And I was surprised to see that with geographically named teams, your trainer Amy Murphy seems to be part of Team Ireland. I know Murphy's an Irish name, but Amy did not seem very Irish when she was on the inside the rails. How's that come about?
Well, I'm not sure the reason it's allowed, but I can tell you the reason why Amy wanted to join Team Ireland. Last year, she was in Team East, and she didn't really get much of a look in. She thought there was a better chance of her having runners by being part of Team Ireland. Having said that, she was persuaded not to declare Pride of America in a £100,000 open handicap because it might have led to a smaller field or horses lower down the weights running with more weight than their allotted handicap mark. I have to say she wasn't best pleased.
Oh dear. Yeah, and I did read that attendances were not great at the Racing League last year, so let's hope they're better this year. The prize money at the fixtures is very decent, so I feel that the Racing League really deserves some support, although this geographic team name thing does seem a bit strange if it's a free-for-all. Perhaps we should suggest a change, maybe naming the teams after their racing managers. So, I might be off to trademark Blake's Bullets or Chapman's Chargers. But, I might have to replace Jamie Osborne as one of the managers, though, because I think the alliteration might be a bit too challenging.
Well, thinking about the other team managers, you could have Dettori's Daggers or Osborne's Optimists. And talking of Osborne, what another great racing league for Safi Osborne, Jamie's daughter, who rode another treble at Yarmouth. She rode a treble last year and then followed it up with her first domestic group win when winning at Ascot on King George Day. Brilliant for her. She's really a jockey to watch, I think, Phil. Anyway, let's move on to the RSA race day at Nottingham, which you and I were very heavily involved in organising. Did you enjoy the day?
I did. I don't think the rain we had before racing encouraged too many walk-ups for the afternoon, which was a shame. I thought the meeting deserved a bigger crowd, especially, of course, as I tipped 3 winners, a second, a third and a fourth.
You were in sparkling form, Mr. B. Just to explain, you and I were on a punters panel beforehand to try and give the Nottingham racegoers some winning tips for the tipping competition that they were running in the race card. Suffice to say, I think some of my tips are still running. Anyway, how was your trade stand? How did it go?
Yeah, it was good. We had quite a lot of good conversations with people. I'm not sure whether it will lead to much, as it was a flat racing meeting in the Midlands, and my flat racer that I could have sold shares in is based in the southeast. I do have our new jumps mare who's with Neil Mulholland and could race more locally for Nottingham-based people, but there's no jumps racing at Nottingham, so most of the attendees had less interest in jumps than they did in the flat. But it was a good afternoon. How did you find it?
It was okay. I sponsored a race, which I hadn't done for a few years. So I gave the best turned out and presented the prize to the winning connections. So a bit of exposure and publicity there. I think it's more interesting if you've got a runner in your own sponsored race, which I've had in the past. And I think in future, I'd probably be inclined to sponsor a race closer to home. But you never know, something might come of it.
Yeah, let's hope so. And yeah, the tented village that we had, the little trade village we had, was very good. And I have to admit, my master plan, which was to have a presence on half of the trade stands. As you know, I sell small shareholdings of my horses, and that means often people will buy a small share with me alongside a bigger shareholding with someone else. So it did mean I snuck BG Racing shareholders onto 3 of the 6 trade stands.
And I thought it was Aidan O'Brien who was after world domination. I was fortunate enough to have the assistance of one of my owners, David Gibbon, on the trade stand, and that was a big help.
Yeah, I saw David, and I had my wife Sarah and one of my shareholders, Lawrence, with me. They did a cracking job, especially as I was in the paddock before racing, doing the punters panel with you, and then I was off doing some video with the guys at Nottingham for their social media around their new Syndicate Lounge launch. I ended up presenting the prizes for one of the RSA sponsored races, and I got interviewed about the day on Racing TV.
And you've called me a media tart in the past. 3 words: pot, kettle, black.
Yeah, that does seem entirely fair, unfortunately, yeah. Just to round off our chat about Nottingham Day, though, I would want to mention the guys at Nottingham who were brilliant in helping put the day together. They really pulled out all the stops.
Hear to that. And a big thank you particularly to Sam, Nicola and Kim for all their very hard work at Nottingham. The RSA rounded off the day with a £2,000 bonus presentation shared between Grange Park Racing and the Kingsclear Racing Club for their second places. So well done to them. Every little bit of prize money helps, doesn't it? Well, it's that time of day for our special guest to join us, jockey Stefano Cherchi, who, it being a Sunday morning, I guess won't have been riding out. Hi, Stefano. Thank you for joining us. Did you get a mini lie-in this morning?
Good morning, Simon. Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, I woke up at 7 o'clock, but for me, it's a lie-in. I went for a run early on this morning, and now I'm all set, nearly ready for lunch.
Excellent. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us on Inside the Rails. In our last podcast interview, we had Annalisa Balding on, and we discussed how to pronounce the 2000 Guineas winner, Caldean, spelt Chaldean, but pronounced Caldean. So let me get this right once and for all. How do we pronounce your surname? Is it like a bottle of Chianti, so spelt with a C, but pronounced with a K? Is it Cherchi, Cherchi? Please put me out of my misery.
Well, it's like a bottle of Chianti, because in Italy, CH is like in England, the K. So my surname is Cherchi. But only few people know that. So if somebody actually says my name right, I'm like, oh, what's wrong with you? So it's I got used to it now. Obviously, I lived in England for 6 years, and I got used to be called Cherchi.
Right. Well, I will try and get it right in future, and I'm glad we've cleared that up. Now, look, you're attached to Amy's yard, Amy's Southgate Stables, having moved from Marco Botti's, I think, a couple of years ago. Originally, you were riding in Italy. Come on, tell us more about the Stefano Cherchi story and how you got into racing.
I always loved going racing. My dad used to take me as a kid. I remember him coming to pick me up from school with an excuse that I had to go to the dentist or something, because he knew how much I loved horse racing. And, we race once a week, and I wanted to make sure, I wouldn't miss the opportunity to go and watch. So it's been something that I always wanted to be since I was very, very young. And I remember my mom, she was never happy because I used to wreck the place, running around, pretending I was carrying a stick everywhere and hitting everything, riding a finish. So look, it's something that I always wanted to do since I was just probably pretty much start speaking, really. And I always rode out back home, but at the age of 16, I decided to move to England and get passed to Marco Botti's stable, which it's been like a second family for me, And I spent there my first 4 years of my career, actually 3 years, because it took me a year to get my license out. And then when I was coming towards the end of my £5 claim, you're trying to expand your contacts as wide as you can, spread your wings. And I decided to move into, with Amy's, which she gave me the opportunity to ride out for more different trainers. And as I say, to, gain as many doors as possible.
Now, you've ridden over 100 winners, some in Italy, for many trainers and outfits, including Godolphin, which is very prestigious. But Stefano, how hard has it been making a transition from being an apprentice using a claim to riding on a level playing field? And for the benefit of our listeners, can you explain, first of all, what is an apprentice's claim and what are the different levels of claim and when does a jockey lose them?
Yeah, obviously, as you know, when you first get your license out, they give you a £7 allowance, which it gives you the chance to take half a stone off every horse's back that you ride, which is a massive help. And trainers are encouraged to use you because obviously, in them handicaps where your horse is carrying 10 stone and you can take 7 off, it's a massive help. And in this game is all about playing with the handicaps and the weights, and obviously £7 is a massive help. But when you first start, it's very hard to earn the trust, because obviously people are not sure if you're able to ride at this point because you haven't exposed yourself, and sometimes horses can be tricky and they need a bit of experience. So early on when you claim 7, it's a bit tough, but once you get going and you prove yourself, it's a massive help, and it helps your career to get rolling. And from 0 to 20 winners, you claim 7, and after that you go down to £5, which is a massive help still. And people obviously think you're more than capable of riding because you've ridden 20 winners. And for me, that's the best part of the early part of your career, because it gives you the chance to get into lots of yards. And obviously, I think is where you ride, probably where you start riding some nice winners. And then from 50 to 95, which is very hard to get there, it's very hard to lose your claim. As you know, there is a very low percentage of jockeys that are able to do that. It's where you go down to £3 claimer, and it's quite tough because obviously £3 are not as much as 5 and 7. So at this point of your career, you almost need to be a pro and ride like a pro, but with £3 in hands, which is the only reason why trainers and owners would want to use you. Because at this point, obviously, £3 doesn't make a huge difference. But if you ride better than a £3 claimer, it's very useful to use you.
Now, you've lost your claim now, so well done on that. But how have you found it this year, the transition from not having the claim anymore? How have you found it in terms of getting rides? Has it been as tricky as you thought it might be?
Yeah, I was prepared for that because obviously, unfortunately, I lost my claim during the winter, which there is no many races. But in terms of rides, I've been very lucky that I got plenty of support. But I wish I was a bit lucky in getting winners, because I had so many seconds and thirds that they don't really help. But look, it's only a matter of time. Obviously, when you first lose your claim, every jockey went through quite phase of getting rides, and again, I think you need to prove yourself that you're more than capable of riding even without your claim, and owners and trainers will still want to use you.
Look, I'm sure the winners will flow. You wouldn't be the first apprentice, would you? Or apprentice come fully fledged jockey to find it a little bit tricky, but I'm sure it'll work out for you. You've got lots of good connections. And thank you for that explanation about losing a claim. That was really clear. Now, still on the subject of weight, I know you like your Italian food. How do you find, or how difficult do you find it, keeping your weight down? And what's the minimum weight you can do comfortably?
Comfortably, I say I can do probably 8-6 every day. On a Saturday, where you try and push yourself a bit harder, you try and go down a couple more pounds. But look, there is jockeys that struggle with the weight more than I do, but at the same time, I'm the kind of person that I'd rather keep an eye on it every day than wake up and having to lose 4 or 5 pounds, because I think that's very unhealthy, So I try all week. I try to eat quite healthy, and then on the weekend, you just allow yourself to have a nice dinner or a nice lunch, because obviously at the same time you need to enjoy yourself a little bit.
Yeah. Now, look, obviously I'm not a jockey and I'm a lot older than you, but I've been trying to lose weight since Christmas, and I've found a good way is to try and cut it down to 2 meals a day. What do you do? Do you have 3 meals a day too? What's your routine?
Yeah, I try to have something small, but like small meals, but more often. Like if halfway through the morning, if I feel a bit hungry, I just try and get some fruit. And obviously when wake up, I'll have a coffee to get my metabolism going, then I go and ride out, and it's all, obviously the portions are very little, as you know.
Yeah.
But it's part of the game. It's something that when you first get into racing, and you have to be mentally prepared, because obviously when you have light on a Saturday, you obviously you wanna perform 110%, but knowing you need to sweat a little bit, so physically, you could be struggling a little bit, but you need to be more than ready mentally.
Hi, Stefano. I know you ride out for Amy Murphy, and it sounds like you do so for other trainers as well. Do you have a typical routine, or does it vary for you from day to day in terms of your morning routine?
Yeah, obviously, mainly I ride out for Amy and Marco Botti, but on Gallops Day, which in the summer is pretty much every day, you try and go and walk the horses that you potentially could ride in the race, in the next week at the races. And there is a number of trainers that support me that I obviously need to help them out as well. So you go, you meet them at the gallop, so you go in the yard and ride from the yard. And obviously it's good because you get to know the horses, and you know how well they are, and so at least when you go racing, if you got a chance.
Sure. And obviously all jockeys want to be champion jockey, but are there any targets you've set yourself either during the next year or two, or longer term than that?
I just want to be the best jockey I can be, Obviously, as you said, everybody wants to be champion jockey and win the Derby and the Arc de Triomphe, which are the most prestigious European races. But in terms of myself, I just want to be the best version of myself, and I'm sure that will mean lots of winners and lots of Group 1s.
Absolutely. And one final question from me. Obviously, at one point, Frankie Dettori was the only Italian riding in this country, but now there's yourself, there's Andrea Rizzini, Marco Gianni. I'm sure there's probably one or two others. Do you think Frankie inspired other Italians to come over to ride in the UK?
Well, obviously, I think Frankie inspired lots of people because he's not just a jockey. He's something else in racing, as you know. And I think being Italian, yes, you want to try and almost copy him, which we know that nobody else is going to be like Frankie, because he's just himself. He's just unique.
Thanks, Stefano. Look, just before you go, we've really enjoyed having you on. One question we like to ask all of our guests: if you could change 3 things in British racing, and only 3 things, please, for the good of British racing, what would they be?
Right, the first one would be prize money, because I do think in England there is the best horses pretty much from all over the world, because as you can see, horses from England, they go anywhere in the world and they do well. And I think the prize money compared to the quality, it's not very good. And in other countries, even small races, they seem to have a much bigger prize money and seems to get a bigger pot. But hopefully something that, everybody's almost complaining about it. So I'm sure they will do something about. And then another thing is I think racing should be on more channels, because as you can see, when it's night TV, lots of more people get involved, and I think that could lead to something else. The other day, the Racing League was on, and they had 2 channels, which, it helps a lot to get people involved. And at the end of the game, you want to get as many people as you can involved.
And a third one, possibly? The
third one could be, luckily I don't have to pay tickets, but I know sometimes tickets to get into the races can be very expensive. And, and that doesn't always help people that wants to come and watch us riding. I think they could find a fine line between, obviously, making people pay something to get into the races, but I know sometimes they can be too expensive, and I hear lots of people complaining.
Yeah, that's interesting. We had Mike Catamol, who I'm sure you know, as our guest quite a few episodes ago, and he mentioned about entrances and the cost of getting into racing. He thought it should be either free or a lot cheaper at the bread and butter meeting. So that's interesting that you've mentioned that. Listen, we've loved having you on. Thank you for sparing your Sunday morning, because we don't normally record on a Sunday, but hopefully that's fitted in with your schedule. What's the rest of the day hold for you?
It's been a pleasure for me to be on. The rest of the day for me would be get a nice Sunday roast ready.
Oh,
lovely. I love doing that, and probably later on in the evening, if the rain stays away, we'll take the dog for a walk.
Okay. Well, listen, have a great day and have a really good season. I hope those winners start to flow for you. It's been a pleasure having you on. Thanks, Stefano.
Thanks, Simon.
Well, Phil, I know Stefano quite well. I thought he'd be a good guest. At the very least, at last I know how to pronounce his surname, Stefano Cherchi, which is great. Look, I think the thing I took out of that was he seems very optimistic, making a transition from being an apprentice to a fully fledged jockey. He's obviously not been, completely smooth sailing early doors, but he's very optimistic. He's got connections, and I'm sure the winners will flow for him, won't they?
Yeah, seems like a very well-grounded and nice young man, which always helps building relationships with people. So I'm sure as long as he keeps riding away consistently, I'm sure he'll have plenty of success in the future.
Yeah.
Let's hope we can get a similarly good guest next month. And as usual, I will round off by asking our listeners if you could like us or review us or give us a 5-star rating on whatever platform it is that you've downloaded or are streaming the podcast from. That would be great. We're always looking to try and grow our listenership, and that is the best way of doing so, is for our existing listeners to recommend us to new people. We also welcome people getting in touch on Twitter. We're at Inside the Rails there, and our contact details are in the show notes if anybody wants to get in touch with us directly.
Well, that just leaves me to thank co-host Phil Boyle from BG Racing, our very special guest Stefano Cherchi, producer Callum Ronan from Callum Ronan Creative, and of course, you, the listeners. Racing's not always about the big guns, and it's not always about the men in what tends to be a male-dominated sport. Northern-based trainer Julie Camacho won the July Cup at Newmarket, Amy Murphy won the John Smith's Cup at York, and Safi Osborne won her first domestic group race in the Longines Valiant Stakes at Ascot. This is Simon Double from Solaria Racing saying, thank you for listening to Inside the Rails, and until next time, goodbye.